to even start with you, Nils, how do you relate to the experience in Singapore and maybe where we stand here in Germany, both in terms of mindset, but also just the everyday work we do, how we work, from your experience with GovStart?
Yeah, thanks for the question and thanks for having me on this panel. I find it every time quite interesting. Singapore is very advanced, of course, when it comes to GovTech and urban tech. Although I always think they have a very different way of approaching government and GovTech. And just one example, Singapore is very superior in attracting talent directly into government. So the top talent from this country is actually applying for government jobs with it, which is unimaginable in countries like Germany or others in Europe, actually, to be fair. So I think the circumstances are different, and but I think it's always very, very interesting to see what they're up to, what they are doing, especially when it comes to legislation, policy making, stuff like that, in terms of deliveries and who's actually bringing tech to the urban environment or to the government. I would sometimes disagree if this is always a task that government should do and deliver.
And it's especially cool to have you here because Public kind of spearheaded the whole GovTech work or maybe even community in Europe over the last couple of years, starting from the UK. You have just next week, in fact, your big GovTech summit as well. You really managed to like bring the awareness to it, but also what are the pros, what are the cons of engaging with startups. But maybe just like give us a feeling like why should government actually collaborate with startups?
Well, so I think the point I did with Singapore is a good one. Talent is actually one. So I think the most talented people are attracted by an entrepreneurial way of working, you know, building up something new, working in your own company, really making a difference. And I think entrepreneurs and startup founders are pretty well positioned to do that. And I think government can benefit from a thriving startup scene just in the same way as the finance industry did or insurance did. So every time we see big corporations, big organizations struggling with innovation, there's always a point to bring in founders having new ideas and really great incentives to build something new and to make a difference.
Great. Thank you so much, Nils. Do we have Tony already on the line? We'll be there in a second. So maybe, Mali, I'll come to you now. I think you are very much like involved in European, let's say like in the European startup scene, but also in like the public side of things. So actually you are talking or also advising the European Commission on what are big next steps forward. How do you see the ecosystem maybe also from your experience, because you have quite a diverse background in other regions of the world, or especially also Asia. Like how do you feel Europe is comparing in terms of its awareness of harnessing these kind of young bottom-up innovations?
Yeah, first of all, I know I'm a quite massive mix because originally I'm from Tel Aviv, but I worked with China for 8 years. I had a production line, 8 factories there in Shenzhen. And what I see here, and yes, in a big umbrella is the European Commission, but also Berlin Senate. You know, we are sitting here today in AsiaBerlin talking about how the Berlin Senate can support startup corporates. There is a good movement, I would say, that we are making here in Europe. It's much slower, and you know, also comparing Singapore, it's the culture. I mean, let's just put it on the table. It's the culture. I do believe as Germany, we do have all the different parts of the puzzle that we need to have. You know, talents, capital, access, infrastructure, and industry. What else? Like I can tell you, I built 6 companies in my life. I wish I had that at the beginning, you know, while I was in Israel, building the first and the second company. But here in Germany, we just still do not have the right, what can I say, communication, collaboration between those parts. This is maybe one of the main reasons that I'm so involved when it comes to the higher level, bigger umbrella. You know, W Launch is an ecosystem, so I got a lot of access for amazing talent, and on the other hand, amazing investors as well. But Magda Group, on the other hand, it's a fund of fund, which, again, taking us to a bigger level because we saw the obstacles and we want to take down or actually eliminate those obstacles for founders, because the biggest problem we have here that we do not have enough unicorns. We do not have enough success stories.
And maybe let's stick to this point in terms of, you know, I think nobody needs unicorns for the sake of you know, unicorns or showing off, but more like in terms of the disruptive change or the change just being actually implemented, being actually mainstreamed, the innovation actually reaching to much farther places. And I think Bill Gates, he recently also said, like, you know, in light of the current situation with climate change and so on, is like we really need to start deploying innovation in an unnaturally fast way. And I think this is where the whole logic of venture capital, unicorns, and so on can kick in, but for social good, for a social purpose. And
instead of.
And I want to ask you, Mali, like, do you have a good example maybe from Berlin? You are based here, you have your network here, and you know we are talking about urban tech, also big businesses, ideas with big potential coming out from this ecosystem.
So as I mentioned, we do not have a lot, but yes, we do have amazing stories as well. But there's also, coming back to the culture that I have to mention in this, I would say, format or discussion. Also in Germany, we do not like to talk about success. It's kind of like unpolite, you know. But if you talk about Israel, Silicon Valley, if you have exit, if you have some success stories, it's all over the news first page, and so on. And this is also part of the culture. We need to highlight the success stories. So coming back to your question, you know, today European Commission is launching the Horizon 2030. That I'm super lucky to be there and to see where it goes, because I want to make sure that enough capital is also coming to Germany, and also female founder, and a lot of things that I'm fighting for, but it's a good fight because I think we are going to win. But we do have Infarm. You know, I brought Infarm to this discussion as well because it's a very successful story. You know, sehr stolz aus Berlin, but on the same time, they are very well known in the European Commission because the EIC started they started as getting a lot of support from the EIC. So back to where we are, there is a different layer of support for entrepreneurship here. And when you talk about unicorn, maybe we see it in a different way, because yes, we need to have unicorns, because unicorns eventually bring the success, and those founders that know and have the experience of how to build unicorns, they will become the best investors, which means they will bring back to the society quite fast. And this is what we see in Israel. This is absolutely what we see in Silicon Valley. Right now, it's the second generation of investors. And the investors today are much smarter and much sensitive when it comes to impact investment, to the social good. And your topic, it's bingo for this.
Perfect. And we'll actually hear more from Infarm later when we share our entrepreneur stories in the panel following this and after the short break, especially also how Infarm managed to expand to Japan, which will be quite an interesting story I'm looking forward to. I believe we have Tony now also in the line, joining us live from Hong Kong. Tony, can you hear us? There you are. We see you. Amazing.
That's a good sign.
Fantastic. We're doing very well. Great to have you with us, Tony. Just briefly, it's also a hard job, like for most of, actually all of you here sitting on the panel, to describe what you do. Especially, you have tried out a lot of things. You're a serial entrepreneur. You're an investor. You are managing your own fund now, also focusing on urban tech solutions in Asia. But you're also a film producer and many more things. But tell us a little bit about the work of that you're currently doing. And also, you know, why it matters to have more investment going into clean tech solutions or others that actually like really upgrade, you know, in a sense, our physical infrastructure.
All right? It's amazing to join you all in this room and also this virtual space. I would much rather be there in Berlin with you all, and I already expressed my sadness about not being there yesterday. But let me just contribute to the conversation as much as I can from here. I'm indeed in venture capital, and I'm indeed in urban tech as well. I have a segment of my life that is only about early stage venture capital, accelerator management, corporate innovation consulting, and there we did a couple of projects in what how we used to label it smart cities. But in the process was amazing for me because I realized this was the area where I wanted to double down and I wanted to commit myself to for the coming decades. And 3 years ago, I decided to set up a dedicated platform to urban tech, and I call it urban tech with impact. That is our thesis: technology and innovation that can positively impact urbanization. And especially, I would like to help European urban tech companies come to Asia and connect with the investors, ecosystems, and big corporations that can help in the growth with. And that's what we've been doing over the past couple of years, and we are about to launch our dedicated or the first dedicated urban tech fund, indeed, which is a later stage venture capital fund. Hopefully, by the end of this year or the Q1 next year, we will be launching this, which will be only one of many funds according to our plans that will be covering different aspects of urban tech. This first fund is focusing on what we call new infrastructure, with a very strong focus on China, access to China. And new infrastructure is a term that has been launched in China a couple of months ago, and that's a strong focus of the central government and accordingly to the regional and municipal governments, which are all very relevant, of course, for partnerships and investment when it comes to urban tech.
Tony, sorry, can you give us some examples also, like some of the, let's say, the trends you're seeing on the ground, being there, based in Hong Kong, where that also excite you when you actually look at them from an investor's perspective, but also from an impact and the climate perspective?
So I would like to just mention impact for a second because you specifically asked me in the opening question. For about 6 years now, ever since I entered the venture capital space, as you mentioned, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I became an investor, venture capitalist 6 years ago, and ever since then, I refused to use the term impact investment because I've been advocating that any good investment thesis of the future should be impact positive. So for me, by definition, good investment means investment with impact, and that's what I've been standing for. And also our funds are not labeled as impact funds. These are impact positive funds by nature. There is more and more interest and more commitment for impact positive investment in Asia as well as anywhere around the world. I guess since BlackRock came out with their commitment not to invest in anything with negative impact, it has become mainstream. In China in particular, impact positive investment, fintech, renewable energy investment have been very strong and going very strong for many years now, and that has been picking up as a trend over the rest of Asia as well. Why China is very relevant and interesting when it comes to urban tech is because it's labeled, according to a lot of different reports, as the #1 urban tech market. Some of the biggest urban tech venture investments have happened in China, depending on how one classifies those. But Didi has been leading the biggest as an urban tech company from the past couple of years. So this is a huge market. This is also a huge opportunity for overseas entrepreneurs, technology companies, where I specialize in Europe, but also it is a highly innovative environment with great companies growing. Not only China, of course, Japan, Korea have been traditionally very strong. Singapore has been emerging as a regional hub in Southeast Asia, and the problems and the issues to solve across Asia, and our focus is Eurasia with 70% of the world's population, are enormous. This is the area, this is the region where the world is fastest urbanizing. Of course, Africa is coming and coming on strong and will be a very important place for urban tech for the coming decades. But it is happening in Asia right now. Huge market, huge opportunity, and great innovation.
Thanks, Tony. Really fascinating to also see your observations from on the ground. Nils, I would actually like to ask you also, how do you see, like, in terms of, again, the government setting maybe the framework for innovation as well? What's your take on the whole, like, the discussion that was sparked with GDPR, but not only around like self-sovereign identity, like other kind of like bigger trends, let's say, of normative frameworks, but also from European cities, for instance, we see a different kind of like self-confidence emerging. If you look at what Barcelona does, what Amsterdam does, where it's a much more critical kind of approach to smart cities, really focusing also on things that Ayesha mentioned, like citizen-centered instead, for the social good, maybe building in different kinds of like privacy-preserving principles. So making sure not everything lands on the servers at Google and Apple. So yeah, would love to hear your thoughts on this. What can be Europe's role maybe to set such standards? Is it a good thing or is it slowing us down?
Yeah, so I'm a bit in between chairs at this. I think Tony did a great point when he said China's an interesting market for urban tech. And I think if we look at Europe, lacking one digital market, actually having different languages in different countries. So most startups actually come to us, to public, and ask us, okay, look, can you help us to scale throughout Europe, because we need to enter so many different markets, actually, because France, especially when you look at cities and government, it's very different from Germany, it's very different from Denmark, and that's what makes it hard in Europe to actually scale solutions throughout Europe, and especially because we are also lacking infrastructure that is helping us. When you look at cloud services, there's no European hyperscaler, for example. So those are some issues I'm seeing there. But to come to the positive side of things, I see that there are tremendous efforts to really push a new way of looking to urban tech and smart cities and government innovation. And I think the pandemic crisis we were in did a lot actually to foster this as well. And I think that we see some cities really emerging, as you said, Barcelona, for example, and GDPR is often seen as an example for good data protection, which can be a way, not just to foster this as well and to implement policies that work out. But I think Mali will agree that's something we should do on the EU level, actually, to really help us having an environment that is and a market that is big enough to really scale solutions and bring solutions that are benefiting the European citizen and not just only citizens of one country or another.
And Mali, I would love to hear your thoughts, because you're also so so experienced with ecosystems. Like, do you think there's something inherent in a ecosystem that brings about a different kind of innovation? And I was thinking back, we briefly talked beforehand about this, let's say the comparison of how mobile came out of China, and Mobike and the likes, all the ride sharing or bike sharing companies, and sort of swept like a wave over Europe within a matter of like weeks and months, and suddenly you had them simply as a reality on the street in across our Europe cities. whether it's good or bad, I'm not judging this, but I think it came as a shock. It came as a shock to local cities, to local authorities. They weren't prepared. They didn't know how to deal with it. And maybe contrast this with examples like we have now coming out in, let's say, the next wave of scooter innovation, with specifically European, let's say, born startups, perhaps even unicorns, like Tier as an example. What's your thoughts on this?
I mean, first of all, sorry for saying this again, but it's coming back to the culture. Because, like, as Chinese launching something, and I have a good friend, she was part of the founding team in TikTok, what was Musical.ly back then, Chinese mindset, and not only Chinese, okay, also American and Israeli, it's like, I would say, implement and conquer, like control the market, lead the market. There's no second player or second kind of like mediator. So I would say that with this mindset, you understand that you have to throw tons of money on implementing an access to a new market. And this is what they did. This is what they did. If it works or didn't work, it's a different discussion, but it's also like culture and learning the culture and taking the time, because in other markets, or like specifically China or the US, they are much more early adopter for innovation. And here, kind of like, let's see others, maybe they will get hurt, this is okay, and then we'll step in, which is coming back to the family offices, coming back to the M&As, I'm working with them, but you understand the attitude, which is okay, if you understand the attitude, if you understand the culture, you know how to work with it, but from outside, I would never know it, okay? If I would still live in Israel, I would never understand the code. Coming back to what you mentioned, it's not necessarily the right approach, to launch new market and want to lead it, because it's taking time. So coming back to Tier Mobility, that we all understand this is a startup, but we all know that who is backing this startup. And this is actually a very good story, because it's backed by the German infrastructure, Deutsche Bahn is there as well. So they have all the support. Still, they are founders, they are doing their way, and the LPs, the investors, are part of their journey, but this is a good story. This is a story of launching product, understand the culture, understand the user, and grow with it, and eventually, acquiring other companies and so on. But this is a very positive story, and I think that I'm sure that they are going to be very successful. From my point of view, I'm doing things with Tier Mobility when it comes to diversity, So at least they will build a company in the right way, and they will hire enough women and have all this diversity team inside, because it's usually outperforming. People understand more cultures coming from different backgrounds. So it's the culture, it's the attitude, and we cannot compare. We rather not compare Asian startup and German startup, because the smallest meetups in China is 500 people, 300 people, So you need to understand the volume, and when you launch something, definitely some platform. And I can tell you from TikTok stories, all they did is user acquisition, nothing. That was God. So I don't think this is the attitude here, It's like, let's test it and test it again, and maybe test it again, and maybe again, and then someone build it kind of like won the competition from other market. And this is obstacles, but this is good things that we see here, that they are getting better and better.
And I think also it probably goes back to, let's say, the maturity of the market where you launch, because I think a lot of the attitude here in Germany is, in general, like, stuff is working. Like, it's actually working fairly well. So you don't look at it and say, like, yeah, let's break everything that's working well first, and then but we can move fast. And I think this is also why, just from our own work, working with urban tech startups, we see the route to market often goes through stakeholders, or some may call them gatekeepers. But actually, you need to build partnerships often, at least in Germany, in Europe, I would say, to successfully scale or even limit the risk of being regulated out of the market if you don't do it. Like take Uber, for example, coming to Germany, who have been repeatedly sort of like been regulated out, and they always come back in another form or shape. But Tony, what's your thought on this? On anything that you would like to comment on.
A lot has been shared, but let me just give an anecdote, because I guess my role here is to give a different perspective from Asia. We mentioned Didi, you mentioned Uber, you mentioned that companies need to work with the gatekeepers. I think on many occasions this is actually the government. I do feel that when it comes to urban tech, especially cross-border urban tech, there needs to be an attitude of collaboration and working together with the local incumbents and gatekeepers, the regulators, the governments, especially when someone tries to exit the China market. But quite frankly, any market in Asia is pretty similar from that perspective. So I had a huge revelation a couple of years ago, and I've been in Asia for more than a decade now, so it didn't come as a surprise, but I do know how people usually perceive China. And there was a moment when the entire world was banning Uber, or half the world was banning Uber from their cities. And in China, a party secretary gave a interview that they are working out the regulation around Didi-like, so Uber-like services, because the consumers want it. And that came from the central government, central communist party's party secretary, basically accommodating capitalistic and consumer demand, which I thought was kind of ironic, considering how the world considers China and the Communist Party basically allowing and catalyzing innovation and urban tech. And for me, that was a great realization how much China is actually ready to lead in this space, how enlightened the leadership is when it comes to catalyzing innovation. And as you very well said, people in this part of the world are very much early adapters, and the government is an early adapter as well. They do have KPIs to innovate and to catalyze innovation. So it's actually a great environment to operate in, as long as the access and the understanding is there. Just to write on Molly's terminology, the culture of innovation is definitely here across the board. Now, as much as in state-owned enterprises, as much as local municipal governments, of course, the big tech companies such as Alibaba, Tencent, or the others, it is a great environment to operate in. But the right partnerships need to be built. I am advocating the new dawn of public-private partnerships. I call it PPP 2.0, might be even 3.0. But when it comes to urban tech, I think it will be a very important thinking process.
Nils? Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tony. I would totally agree with you. Like, private-public partnerships, for me, are as well on the rise. They are a perfect model to bring this culture you just talked about, and Malik talked about it as well, to bring this culture into the public sector. So joining forces together with startups, with maybe even corporates, and do this together. Maybe try to involve government, involve corporates, involve infrastructure companies as LPs in financing these efforts. So I think this is a great way of changing the systematics around it and really fostering the culture of innovation within government, which is needed. I think there is a movement right now, and there are things happening. Could be maybe a bit faster, and that could be a way of really doing that.
I want to give you a positive example.
Mali,
Yes.
you got 1 minute because
Okay,
then
I
we
will
need
do
to
it
wrap
in
up.
20 seconds because, like, we're talking about culture and access, but you know, even for me, it took 2 years to find the right factories in China, and not each factory to go to produce my product and to gain the trust and build a relationship. So, relationship is one thing. Knowing the culture and how to approach and talk with the Chinese, it's a totally different discussion, and we won't do it here. But I have to tell you, Israel, which is a very, very small country and very isolated one, working super strong with China and, you know, Tencent and everyone out there and acquiring everything. Like if you build startup in Israel, I would say 2 months you will get a term sheet from Tencent in terms of like this is how it's worked there. They're hiring people and so on, which means it's knowing the culture, it's building a relationship, and this is also in politician level, to bridging the cultures, to make much more collaboration, communication, and this is how you build, you know, success, LPs, investors, and so on.
You effectively said what I wanted to say. This is the perfect ending. Mali, Nils, Tony, thank you so much. I couldn't also think of better bridge builders on stage with me for this session, and I think it was very insightful. We heard some really interesting stories, and I'm excited to see what the next 5 or 10 years will bring. Oh, yes. So thank you so much, and maybe let's do it another time again.